Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our next webinar in the Evidence-Based Practices for SEL series. I'm excited today to share with you some information about paths. And we have Mark Greenberg, formerly of Penn State, and now the Bennett Chair of Prevention Research, and the founding director at the Edna Barrett Pierce Prevention Research Center. So just so that you all know, this series is being recorded, so this presentation will be recorded. Please note that we do need to send it to our vendor in order to get closed captioned, and we can't post it until that is done. So we will notify people through the listserv as well when these are available, and you will find them on the alignment page web sheet or web page where, in this case, paths alignment sheets are located. Feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat box. I will be monitoring this, and I will be able to filter the questions to Mark at logical pauses. There will be some time at the end for questions as well, but please feel free to ask questions. This is your time to find out as much as you can about this program and whether it's a good fit for your school. And we appreciate you being here and joining us over your lunch hour, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Glad to be with you in Wisconsin, and I hope this presentation is valuable to you in a very practical sense. I'm one of the developers of the PATHS curriculum and the chair of the advisory board to the SEL Worldwide, which provides training on PATHS. What I'll discuss today is just a little bit about what is the PATHS curriculum, how does it work, what does the research show, but I'll do that quite briefly. How can PATHS be implemented effectively? And what supports do SEL Worldwide offer in order to make sure that PATHS is implemented with quality and as part of a whole school program of support? So the PATHS curriculum is the most developed, well, evidence-based model and most studied model of social emotional learning. I'm one of the developers. This shows you just pictures of grade 1. As you can see, just in the grade 1 model, there's a different model for each grade. There's a variety of materials. There's a curriculum itself with explicit lessons very clearly laid out. There are posters that go along with each grade level. Depending upon the grade level, different posters are used. There's an introduction to the curriculum. As you can see in grade 1, there's a puppet of a turtle. And feeling faces that you see on cards I'll discuss later. And you also see a CD with materials that go home to parents, both in English and in Spanish. So what is the PATHS curriculum? It's a school-based model of social emotional learning. I'm one of the developers, and it was developed in 1981, so it's one of the most long-running curriculums, of course, revised numerous times over the time. It's taught by teachers on a regular basis. We believe from the very beginning in 1981 that teachers should be the primary instructor for social emotional learning, not counselors. We learned in our own experience that while counselors can be useful to support teachers, that having a counselor come in once every couple weeks and doing a social emotional learning lesson is of very little value. The teacher is the critical person, both because it's integrated with instruction, with the rest of instruction, and also because teachers are with students all day and help them generalize and apply the skills that are being taught in the lessons. There are versions for both pre-K, kindergarten, and through grade 6. We don't know exactly how many. We estimate about 3,000 schools around the world use PATHS. It's been translated into lots of languages and used in many different contexts, in urban contexts, in rural contexts, etc. And it's identified by multiple federal agencies an effective program, including the blueprints for youth development, CASEL select programs, and lots of other organizations, both in the United States and in other countries. So what does PATHS consist of? Well, I'll tell you that in the end, it consists of living the golden rule. Actually, that's explicitly developed as part of the lessons beginning in grade 3. And we talk about it as treating others the way you want to be treated. And well, that's an easy thing to say. As we know, even as adults, it's hard to live the golden rule. And there are a lot of developmental skills that are necessary to build that kind of developmental ability in both children and adults. We think that 5 critical skills that are key to the PATHS curriculum are Children becoming aware of emotional states in themselves and others, their ability to put feelings into words. This is a critical issue to both reduce aggression and anxiety. The ability to calm yourself down when feeling highly aroused. That could be very angry or could be very excited. Using your thinking skills to plan ahead and consider the effects of your behavior on others, and developing greater empathy and compassion for others. And we believe that children that have these skills are better able to carry out the golden rule and much less likely to be in the principal's office. So what are the essential components for PAS? There's skill building for both students and teachers. There's close integration with literacy and other academic subjects. And as we go on, I'll talk more about how we do this. There's generalization to create opportunities to use the PAS skills throughout the day, and we create lots of opportunities. Providing students with feedback and recognition. Critical was providing sufficient technical support for teachers, and I'll talk about how we do that. And building leadership to support teacher implementation. We believe the role of the principal is critical and key in implementation, and we have separate training and materials, manuals, etc., for principal leadership. And lastly is the critical issue of involving parents, and we do that in a variety of ways I'll discuss. So there are lots of different skills that we teach in PAS. One critical skill is being able to have better self-control, being able to calm down. Some people talk about this as a critical executive function of inhibitory control. We begin to teach this skill of calming down in the pre-K and K period using a story about a little turtle. This turtle has a lot of issues and learns 3 steps for calming down. In the preschool years, this turtle has other puppet friends. Turtle's called Twiggle. There's Daphne the duck and Henrietta the hedgehog and Duke the dog. And the 4 of them are a part of many stories in the pre-K and kindergarten version of PAS. By 1st grade, there's only Twiggle the turtle and his story. What Twiggle learns is what you see on the left side of this slide, 3 steps for calming down. She or he learns to tell themselves to stop, to use internal speech, to take 1 long, deep breath, or oftentimes we need more than 1 long, deep breath, and to say the problem inside, or if there's someone to talk with, say the problem to them and how they feel. These are the steps that the little turtle learns in his adventures, if you will. And those steps, 3 steps for calming down, are then incorporated into the control signals poster that you see on the right. Those are the steps in the red. By 1st grade and later kindergarten, we're teaching the slow down and think skills of developing solutions for problems, thinking about consequences. And of course, we want children to go and try their plans and be metacognitive in the sense that they have to evaluate how did it go. And as we know as adults, and as we know working with children, most of the times that the first idea of how to solve a problem usually doesn't work, unfortunately. And one of the ways we can distinguish children that have problems of aggression and self-control and those that don't is that often kids that are aggressive or have self-control problems are pretty good at developing a first solution. But when that first solution doesn't work, they become very frustrated. They're not able to calm down and go back through the steps again to think about another solution. And so this ability to evaluate how did I do, to calm down if necessary before thinking of another solution is a critical part of the process. Now, problem solving gets more complicated as kids get a bit older. This is a poster. It's a bit squashed because of the PowerPoint, but a poster of problem solving now in 4th and 5th grade. And as you see, when we go back a slide, the control signals poster has that red, yellow, and green. And now we're differentiating out lessons on each one of these steps. Steps that some of them they've learned in earlier grades, and now steps we're building in later grades. So we go through the specific steps of what is a goal, and we have children develop short and long-term goals. We have them think about lots of solutions, but the solutions have to fit the goal. We have them think about the consequences, which of course is always necessary. Choosing the best solution is often also a complicated process for both children and adults, but even more important is making a good plan. If I have a solution to a problem with a friend, I have to make a plan that tells me what I should say and how I should say it, when I should say it, and maybe where I should say it. And so we have a series of lessons where children are in situations where they have a solution, but they have to come up with a plan and think about and role play, practice how to make a good plan and how to carry out a plan. Well, problem solving and self-control are critical aspects of the PATHS curriculum. Just as important is children's abilities to become aware of and to communicate their emotions. Starting in the early grades in kindergarten, we start with what we call feeling faces. And you see here yellow faces for comfortable feelings and blue faces for uncomfortable feelings. We never discuss them as good or bad because all feelings are natural and part of our human heritage. But some feel more comfortable, some feel more uncomfortable. And as children are learning each of the feeling words at different grade levels, they're getting feeling faces in the younger grades that they can use in a variety of ways. If you go back and look at the, back here, you'll see that there's the feeling faces. You can see an example of one, curious and interested, a yellow face, and you can also see a feelings chart. And as new feelings are covered in the lessons, each child gets a feeling face. Teachers put one in the feeling chart, and teachers, of course, use one themselves. Now, there's a variety of ways that these feeling faces are used. One is that if a child is having problems maintaining attention or difficulties with friends, etc., a teacher can just ask them to look through their feeling faces and see which one they're feeling. Teachers post these feeling faces themselves a couple times during the day. And I can guarantee you that if you're a teacher and you post tired in your feeling face in the morning or frustrated or excited, that one of the first things the kids will do when they come into class is they'll go by your desk, they'll look to see what face you have, and they'll ask you questions about it. And this orients the class towards the internal life of not only you as a teacher, but of them as students. As kids get older and we move towards third grade, we move the feelings away from faces and into posters. This is an example of a feelings poster that covers the primary feelings that are covered in grades kindergarten, first and second. And now we introduce the idea of a feelings dictionary in which, as kids are using, students are doing literacy work or social studies work, and they learn new emotions, they enter them into the feelings dictionary. In fourth and fifth grade, we introduce the idea of synonyms, and we introduce a feelings thesaurus. Again, the idea is to teach both dictionary skills and thesaurus skills, academic skills. At the same time, we're teaching emotions. Now, PATHS teaches the core SEL skills as identified by CASEL, and I am one of the founders of CASEL. You probably are all familiar with this wheel, and I don't need to spend much time on it, but there are the internal intrapersonal emotions of SEL competencies, including managing your emotions and recognizing your strengths, positive mindset, etc. There's the blue parts of the circle that are the interpersonal aspects of emotions, showing empathy and understanding, managing conflict, working on how to form relationships and friendships, etc. And there are many, many skills inside of each one of these quadrants. And of course, the green part, which is the problem solving, but not just problem solving, but doing it with an ethical framework that's responding to others and as part of what we would call the golden rule process. So PATHS, of course, is aligned with the Wisconsin SEL model. And if you go on the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction SEL alignment website, you'll see that we have aligned our curriculum with the scope and sequence that Wisconsin has developed. So let me spend a little bit of time just on the research, but not too much. There have been about 14 randomized clinical trials now with preschool and elementary school children. They've been done in the US, the UK, the Netherlands, Switzerland, um, Croatia, Pakistan, and Australia. They've included very large studies of typically developing children in typical schools, but they've also been done with children with learning and behavior disorders, children who are deaf and hard of hearing, including in sign language, and they've been done in both urban and rural populations with multiple ethnicities. I can't go through each study, and you wouldn't want me to, but I can just give you a sort of a summary of the research findings. And these are from randomized trials, most of them done independently of myself or others that are involved in the curriculum. And we see increases in resilient behaviors, especially increases in attention and engagement in the classroom, and improved peer relations. We see improvements in cognitive abilities. I talked about executive functions earlier. We've shown effects on inhibitory control and working memory, and just the broader ability of children's ability to plan ahead and to solve complex tasks. The ability to plan is very important here. And as you would expect, we've shown reductions in maladaptive outcomes with lower rates of aggression, hyperactivity, and inattention, and fewer internalizing symptoms such as sadness and anxiety. Studies have been done in lots of cities that are part of these randomized trials in Minneapolis, in Rochester, in Baltimore, in Cleveland, in Nashville, in Durham, North Carolina, and Seattle, Washington. So there's a wide spectrum of places. Randomized trials have also been done in rural areas like smaller towns in Pennsylvania, for example. The Washington Institute of Public Policy estimates that for every dollar invested in PATHs, there's a $21 or so savings. And this primarily comes from two kinds of savings. One is improvements in academic achievement. For example, a study in New Haven, Connecticut with PATHs showed it improved state test scores in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. The other parts of the savings, and because of higher test scores, that means it predicts higher graduation rates and greater work abilities as adults. The other way that money is saved is by reducing aggression and anxiety and depression. There are cost savings in the mental health system. I'm glad to answer more questions about research findings if you'd like at the end or at any time. Just let me know, but I won't belabor the research part of this today. So in summary, just of what PATHs is, when PATHs is used with well-trained teachers, and the training we think is critical, with appropriate dosage, which we think is about twice a week, from our research, it can substantially reduce the rate of mental health problems. We can promote positive, healthy development, and we can improve cognitive performance. But we don't think of PATHs as just a curriculum. We think it is a vehicle for creating healthy and caring schools. And because of that, we want to understand the right conditions for social emotional learning to thrive in schools. And because we've been doing this for almost 30 years, we have done it in many, many settings, and we've learned a lot about what helps PATHs or SEL more generally to thrive in schools. And so I'm going to spend some time on what those factors are and how they relate to the training that SEL worldwide provides. This is a Castle slide about SEL in the classroom. And this is basically the model we believe in at the classroom level. We need three things. We need a supportive classroom environment. And that means teachers that have good norms for behavior and management. We need explicit SEL instruction, PATHs being an example of that. And we need the integration of SEL in the rest of the academic instruction. And this is critical to us in PATHs. And let me tell you just a few ways in which we integrate PATHs into the academic day. At each grade level, we integrate PATHs with literacy in a variety of ways. First is through children's books. We, at the end of each lesson, have a suggested list of children's books for each topic. Let's say it's a lesson on emotion, like let's say proud or confused. We have children's books we think are great at illustrating that. We have activities after the lesson, usually journal writing, but sometimes they're art or music activities to reinforce the skills learned in the lesson. In the later grades, in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, we use Newbery and award-winning novels that illustrate these the social emotional skills that we're teaching in the curriculum. So, for example, we might use a book like In the Year of the Boar and Jackie Robinson, a great book about ethnicity and conflict and achievement and love. And that book is used as a read aloud. Usually these read-alouds are divided into 7 or 8 sessions with parts of the book being read and then discussions and activities for the students to use afterwards. So we want to integrate with literacy, both in terms of reading, but also in terms of writing. Similarly, we want to integrate paths with social studies and history. One way we do that is in each grade level, there are 4 different lessons that have what we call character biographies. And these are biographies of people, some of them living and some not, some famous and some local, that illustrate character traits which we think are an important part of social emotional development. So just to take an example, in 3rd grade, we're teaching children about goals and how to reach a goal and what it means to have a goal. And we use the example of Harriet Tubman. And we read a book about Harriet Tubman. We have a biography, a short biography of her life. And the goal of this is to show that that she was able to overcome her own fears of crossing the border to bring more former slaves into the North. And she was able to do that because she had a goal that was so important to her that she was willing to give her life for it. We have similar biographies of different kinds. Sometimes we have biographies of children that have done important things in their own communities. And one of the things we want to work with schools at a local level is that over the years, they use paths to develop their own local biographies. They may be of adults or children in their communities that have done important things. And sometimes we even bring in a person to the classroom that's local, that's done something important, that shows a character trait that's important and related to paths. So just like we integrate with literacy and writing, we also integrate with social studies, and sometimes we are able even to integrate with math, STEM. I won't belabor this now, but move on to other topics. We learned a lot about lessons in practice over the years. We know implementation of an SEL program is often difficult because it creates change, and that's part of the process we need to work on. So building school and staff readiness through coaching is critical. Oftentimes when the school adopts paths, we go and have an initial visit before the training to get to know the staff in the school and to find out what's unique about that school and how we can best support them. We know the greatest effects over time occur with school-wide use, and especially when there's strong leadership. And that's why we believe the principal's role is so important. We want to create consistency in the use of the curriculum across the school, yet we want to allow lots of flexibility in the way it's used. We want to support integration with the academic curriculum, with the school culture, and with the community culture. And so we see this as a process that occurs over a number of years, where teachers begin to use the curriculum in a pretty standard way, and over time we support them to figure out how to adapt it as needed for the context that they work in.
So Mark, I have a question if you have a moment.
Yeah.
The question is, when was PATHS last updated?
PATHS was last updated about 8 years ago, and we supply continuing updates from SEL worldwide for things, for example, new novels. As we see new novels come about that we think, or children's books that we think are useful, we provide those to people that are being trained. We've developed more recently new manuals for principals on leadership. We've developed a model school program where we have model schools around the nation and in other countries that schools can visit. So even though the curriculum was about 8 years old in its last model, there are updates that are going on that we provide all the time in training.
Thank you.
Sure. So SEL Worldwide is organization that's the CEO is Dorothy Morelli. I'm sorry she couldn't join us today. But I'll just tell you about some of the things that we offer because of our experience with PATHS over many years. Of course, initial phone call consultation to talk with schools to promote readiness for implementation. We believe that teacher training should occur in 2 days, and those 2 days should be about 6 to 8 weeks or so apart. I mean, it could be 3 months, but the idea is that in the initial teacher training day, we introduce teachers to the curriculum. We practice lessons, and we demonstrate lessons. It's very important teachers actually see lessons being done and begin to practice them themselves. And we prepare them for the first 2 months of the curriculum. We think the second training day is important to be separated because teachers often don't want to learn on the second day things they're not going to do till April. So our second day is a very lively day where teachers come back with both solutions, ideas, things that they've done, problems that need to be encountered. And then we help support them to see the rest of the year, what will happen, and again, role-playing lessons, talking about solutions and challenges. We also provide training and support to all building personnel. That means we have shorter workshops that can be done with support teachers, secretarial staff, people working in the lunchroom, bus drivers, playground personnel. We have manuals for them. We believe that working with everyone in the school is critical to developing a common language and a common model of support. We have training and support separately for parent outreach coordinators, and we have curriculum for parent coordinators that SEL Worldwide provides. And those curriculum can be 1 night. We have a 4-night version, and we have an 8-night version. We do lots of other things with parents in addition. We want to have parents involved in as positive ways as possible. There's a couple other ways that we involve parents. The first way is that when we introduce each new part of the curriculum, it's usually about 3 to 5 times during the year when there's a new unit. There's a sheet sent home to parents, both in English and in Spanish. And on the front page, it basically tells parents what we're doing. So let's say we're introducing what we call the PATHS Kit for the day, which is a compliment process. So we're introducing emotions. We talk about why we're doing this and how it can help children's learning. And then the parents flip over the other side of the page, and it gives them 4 ideas of things they can do at home, very simple things that can support and generalize this skill to the home environment. So parents get those on a regular basis, about 4 to 5 times a year. There's one at the beginning of the year that talks about what is PATHS and why schools are doing it. The second thing we do is what we're called home activities, which is basically homework for kids that's fun, that engages parents. So an example of a homework activity would be that if we're learning how to have self-control in school, children might be asked to go home and either, depending on their age, either draw a picture or write a few sentences with their parents about how their parents show self-control when they're feeling upset. Or on another day, we might send home, when we're teaching about an emotion, let's say proud, a home activity, which is for the children and the parents to talk about a time the parent was proud when they were in 2nd grade. And the child could either be drawing a picture, depending on their age, or writing the story. Of course, we have situations where parents aren't able to support kids, and usually the building works out themselves that another teacher might be a support. We have schools in which custodians take a group of children and work on these things. But the idea is a whole school model in which we're all supporting children, even if their parents aren't able to be very supportive in those contexts. A third thing, of course, we do is we have evening meetings or outreach to parents. We have some parent outreach coordinators in schools for children that need more support, that do home visits and teach parents skills that can be used at home that are parallel to what's being done at school. In some families, we have control signals posters on the refrigerator, or they might be a set of feeling faces in the home to help children regulate themselves in their home environments. There's a variety of things that we do with parent outreach coordinators. We also think it's important when we work with districts to support schools to appoint a PAS lead educator in each building. And we offer the opportunity, it's again optional, to have monthly phone calls between the PAS lead coordinators in each building and our trainers, so that there can be problem solving around all kinds of issues that come up in the buildings. We have ongoing booster sessions to promote quality improvement and local adaptation. And depending upon how this is supported, oftentimes it's supported by grants. We have Fidelity visits where we come in person to review the fidelity of how PAS is going and to give principals and teachers new ideas about how to improve the quality of implementation. As mentioned earlier, we have separate training for principals and other administrators. And we have the phone and email consultation with the lead educators and principals. And then we have free manuals for principal support, for staff, for playground activities, programs for parents, etc. And then we also provide, as you would guess, given how I've talked about this, broader SEL systems change consulting, both at the district and the school level, around issues such as what should be assessed and how it should be interpreted. So the variety of services that SEL Worldwide provides, and that's because we don't think about PAS as just a curriculum. We think of it as part of a leveraged change process to make schools more healthy, more caring, and more compassionate. And that's the broader goal in which the PAS curriculum is embedded.
I have another question.
Sure.
So the question is, there's two parts to this. One is, do you need to follow a sequential order with the lessons, or can you jump from unit to unit based on your data?
Well, there is a sequential order of the lessons, and developmentally within each grade level, they build on each other. While that's said, there are times when it's important to jump and to do things in different orders. So, for example, let's take one of the later grades, fifth grade. We have a unit on how to organize yourself. We spent a lot of time with middle school teachers, and they've told us that one of the big issues is helping children to become more organized. And so we have a series of lessons around organization, like things like getting your backpack ready in the morning and figuring out when's the right time to do your homework when you get home from school during the day. And those kinds of organizational issues. Some teachers like to teach that near the beginning of the year, even though we have it later. So some of these units can be moved, but within units, it's often difficult because lessons within a unit build on each other. Similarly, in first, second, and third grade, we have a unit on manners. And it's often the case that teachers want to teach the manners unit early in the year, even though we don't necessarily place it at the beginning in those years. And so there is some flexibility in thinking about this. And of course, if there's some kind of crisis in the classroom or in the school or in the community, we'd of course expect people to jump to a lesson that would be helpful for that context.
And then this might somewhat be related, but you mentioned the fidelity of lessons. And I think you mentioned that your research found that 2 lessons per week was the dosage at which you would find some of this change. So would you say that you would, for fidelity's sake, require 2 a week? And are there particular lessons that would need to be done in order to meet fidelity?
Well, fidelity is a funny thing. We think fidelity has 2 parts. One is that the skills that are a part of the lesson are being taught effectively, and the children are using them. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is it's done in a way that that's comfortable for the teacher and exciting for the kids. So when the lessons are written as scripted lessons. But we expect that a lesson might be done very differently by different teachers. So let's take a lesson like feeling guilty. Feeling guilty is a powerful emotion. It's an important emotion to feel. And in the guilty lesson, we, like many feeling lessons, start with introducing a feeling, asking children what they know about that word, We show them pictures of children showing that emotion so they can see the face and the body. We show maybe some cartoon pictures of kids in situations where they might feel guilty. And then we have a story in this case about a child who does something that leads them to feel guilty. But even though we have that structured process, we think that every teacher might teach this lesson differently. So I might start the lesson out by telling the students it's about a time when I felt guilty when I was in third grade, if I was a third grade teacher. And of course, kids love to hear these, and it really gathers their attention. But another teacher might have another story that they think is a great story about guilty and start with that. And a third teacher might talk about something that's happening in current events as a way of a beginning hook to the lesson. So all those lessons, we would say, would have fidelity if they covered the skills well. So fidelity, we think of in a broad way. As far as how many lessons a week, we know that 2 lessons a week is sufficient to lead to change. How schools do this is very different. Some schools don't do it 2 days a week. They do it every day, and they do it as part of a class process. Other teachers do it twice a week. We have one process that's part of PATHS called the PATHS Kid for the Day. And this is a process of complimenting that begins in kindergarten. And each day a child is randomly chosen as the PATHS Child of the Day or the PATHS Kid for the Day. And there's a process that takes only 2 or 3 minutes after it's been taught, which is where the child, the teacher models first giving the child a compliment about something. It could be about the way they look, the way they feel, the way they act, the kind of person they are. We have a series of categories that children learn for this in a series of lessons. The child is then able to pick 2 children that have their hands raised that will also give them compliments. These compliments are written down. And then lastly, the child gives themselves a compliment. Those compliments are written on a sheet of paper. They're sent home that day to the parent with a cover letter saying, today, Andre was given these compliments by myself and his classmates. We're really proud of him. We'd like you to add a compliment if you can at home. That's a process that teachers like to do every day. Sometimes they do it at the end of the lesson if it's a day they're teaching lessons. Some teachers do that, incorporate it as something at the end of each day, as the closing of the day. Again, how this is done is a decision of the particular teacher or the school. But even if lessons are just taught twice a week, oftentimes teachers like to do the PATHS Kid for the Day every day. It gives children lots of opportunities. By the way, we like to have the principal and one of some of the lunch ladies or the custodian also come in and become the PATHS person of the day. So it's integrated across the school and not something just for kids in the classroom. How are we doing, Beth? Any other questions yet?
I think we're good.
Okay, good. So what does school-wide SEL look like? Well, this is what it looks like to us. It's everywhere. We want to have the common language of PATHS everywhere in the school, and that's done a variety of ways. For example, the control signals posters are often put in the hallways and on the playground. Sometimes on the playground, we have schools that put little, the traffic cones, red or orange traffic cones, certain places. And those are places that are peace places on the playground where a child can go if they're having a problem and they need to stop and calm down. The front office is important, and we work with the school staff, secretaries, and others so that when kids come to the office for one of a variety of reasons that may have to do with problem behavior, they know how to use the control signals posters with the kids. Starting in 3rd grade, we actually have a sheet that when children have a problem, either in the classroom or maybe they're sent to somewhere else, where they have to complete a sheet that talks about what the problem is and why it occurred and what they were feeling and how they could solve it differently. So the idea is not to punish kids for their misbehaviors, but instead to use them as learning experiences to have them develop their planning and their SEL skills. So we think about this as a whole school model. It's very important to us, and it relates to the well-being not only of children but also of the teachers and support staff. Programs are often adapted, and we know that. We work in many, many places, and we're used to adaptation, and we like it. We think integrating paths with the local academic curriculum, of course, is important. What kinds of books are used at different grade levels, what's going on in STEM and in social studies. I mentioned character biographies. We like the schools over time to develop new character biographies that are also local. But there are also reactive adaptations that are not planful. Shortening due to time issues, less frequent dosage. And we know when those are done, those are likely to decrease the quality of the outcomes for children. So while we think program adaptation is important, we have to think about what ones we want to have made. We also are interested in building long-term local capacity. That is, we have a process for training local trainers. That's a 2 to 3 year process. Very important to us is maintaining quality. So of course, the process begins with outside trainers from SEL worldwide. And we work with the local school or system to identify potential trainers. Those trainers are usually people that have become PATHS teachers or coaches and have demonstrated high quality. Then there's a training process, a gradual training process with that local staff where they co-train, they watch trainings, they co-train. They get direct supervision from myself and from Dorothy Morelli. We videotape their workshops to provide feedback, and we have a process for developing trainer certification and then for ongoing monitoring of trainer certification. And we've done this in a variety of places. For example, in Cleveland Metropolitan Schools, we have 4 local trainers now that do all the training in the district, and we have similar processes in other cities in addition. Just like I mentioned that we have a PATHS kid for the day in each classroom. This is a school in Baltimore, James McHenry School, and this is in the front of the school. This is the PATHS teacher, or it could be the staff of the week. Each week, a staff member or a teacher is chosen, and anyone, parents, other staff, students, other teachers, can write compliments to that person, and they're posted for the week. So just as we're doing processes in the classroom that model these qualities for children, we want to do the same thing at the level of the school itself. So that we think about social emotional learning as something that we're all involved in, and that we all can improve and create a more caring and compassionate school community. So the big picture for us is that to have effective social emotional development in a school, we need effective conditions for learning, just generally in a school. We need to help support children and adults' social emotional skill development. And we're also interested in teacher well-being and awareness. And I'm the chair of another nonprofit called Create for Education. You can Google that, Create for Education. And that is a nonprofit that works on wellness and well-being for teachers and administrators. It has a separate set of programs, primarily the CARE curriculum, which stands for Cultivating Awareness and Resilience in Education. It's a carefully randomized trial-tested curriculum on teacher well-being and mindfulness that's shown to improve teachers' enjoyment of teaching, reduce their physical and mental health problems, and to improve the quality of their instruction. That's probably a talk for another day, but we think that all these conditions, teacher well-being and awareness, good social emotional skill development for children, and effective conditions for learning are all essential and part of what we want to work on to create nurturing, caring, and healthy schools.
Another question?
Sure.
How does PATHS incorporate cultural responsive practices?
Well, PATHS is developed, both for, the current version of PATHS that's published was developed primarily, I would say in many ways, for urban environments. And that's the result of a study that was the last study before the final version was published, which was done in schools that were primarily African-American and Hispanic in North Carolina, in Tennessee, and in Seattle. And so we've tried to incorporate cultural stories of different kinds. The drawings, for example, of course, are done with diversity. And we present stories and contexts in which we think show a diversity, cultural diversity, both in the United States and in other countries. But like anything else, this has to be done at a local level. Let's say we work in a school district like Denver, Colorado, in which some schools are primarily Caucasian and some schools are primarily Hispanic and some schools are primarily African American. We work with each of those schools to think about how they want to make cultural adaptations that will best fit them. And that's true in any school that we work with. So while the curriculum has a great deal of diversity in it and the way it's presented, there's still always a need for local tailoring and adaptation for cultural considerations. This is a picture of children showing their feeling faces in a small village in a school district in Croatia. We work around the world. We work in many countries, about 30 countries right now. And so we work in very culturally diverse settings of all kinds. We work a lot with First Nations communities in both the United States and Canada and Australia. And we work in communities that are that are very, very isolated. For example, we work in the Australian outback in communities in which people have to come 3 days driving to come to our trainings, or we have to drive 3 days to get there. So we worked in a variety of cultural contexts. We think helps us to understand that both culture is important and there's a need for us to work with local schools to make the adaptations that are necessary for local concerns. So maybe we can switch now to potential questions and answers about practical issues that you might have around training, around costs, around doing this kind of work.
So we do have a question about costs of the training.
Like the cost of the training is for SEL worldwide is $2,000. $2,500 per day plus travel costs. So for a state like Wisconsin, usually the first 2 days will cost about $5,000.
And then what about training costs for the materials?
The cost for the materials are sold by a publisher called Channing Beat. And you can, of course, Google PATH's curriculum. It varies by grade level. Some grade levels are more expensive because of the number of puppets and posters, and it varies between about $500 and $800, depending upon the grade level.
So, Mark, you talked about the parent or the principal guide. You talked about some of those other things. Are those through the training, or are they through Channing Beat?
No, they're through the training. So SEL Worldwide has developed lots of extra materials like principles and playground manuals and parent education materials. And those are all done through the training organization. So Channing Beat is a publisher, but the training is done by SEL Worldwide separately, and we provide those materials for free.
Great.
Yeah.
What other questions do you all have? We can open it up to other questions at this point. I have another one that's come up in other webinars, so I think it's good to ask for all programs. You had indicated some research with samples that included deaf and hard of hearing. So are these materials adaptable for deaf and hard of hearing or visually impaired and or blind students?
Well, actually the first study ever done with PATHs was with deaf and hard of hearing children because of my interest early in my career in the mental health of deaf children. And as a result of that, I learned a lot about how to work with children in general by working with deaf children because of being more visual. And that's really how the feeling faces evolved. The feeling faces evolved because we thought that deaf children would do a better job of recognizing their emotions when they had these visual faces. But it turns out it's exactly the same with hearing children. That is, if you ask hearing children how they feel, they'll usually tell you in the early years, happy, sad, fine, tired, or excited. And that's about it. But when they have the feeling faces in front of them, they begin to use all kinds of words that differentiate better emotions. And those are really important because being frustrated is different than being angry, for example. And being sad is different than being feeling guilty or humiliated. And so this ability to differentiate is really critical. And part of that comes from these visual feeling phases, which were originally developed for hard of hearing and deaf children. Now, the thing that we used to do, but we don't do in the published version, is put a picture of the signs, the sign language signs for those words on the feeling phases. But that's possible, of course, to do locally. As far as blind children, or children that have sight and visual problems, we haven't adapted the curriculum specifically for them, but we have used it in a variety of contexts that in which that would be possible. For example, we work in schools for deaf and blind children. PATHS has also been used a lot with children on the autism spectrum, and a group of PATHS trainers that work in Pennsylvania have even taken the tact of making some of the visual stories that we have simpler, so that children on the spectrum can focus more clearly on what's critical in the story. And of course, we're able to supply those drawings for no cost through the training organization. So we've worked with many different kinds of kids. And we see adaptations that are necessary for each one, and of course that's part of the training process.
And then how long approximately are the lessons?
Well, the lessons it depends on the age level. I mean, lessons take on average 20 to 25 minutes, but with kindergartners in the first part of the year, you really probably try to do that, right? So and at the other end, you have fourth and fifth graders that want to stay together for 40 minutes, and oftentimes teachers are so engaged with these lessons that they run them longer. Now, a lesson may take 2 or 3 days. So some of our lessons, because of the context of the content, we'll say at the beginning of the lesson and note to the teacher, this lesson will take 2 or 3 days. And we'll have identified breakpoints that we think are the good breakpoints in the lesson. I'll give you an example. We have a lesson that introduces problem solving again in fourth grade. It's called a treasure hunt. And this lesson is a lot of fun, in which children are given a map of a treasure. And there's the treasures at the end of the map, of course. And to get to the treasure, there are 3 different routes. And one is past an ogre, one is through a swamp of alligators, and one is over very high mountains. And we divide the kids up into groups, and they think about what they would need, when they would go, what they would take with them, etc. But oftentimes we present this at the beginning in a first lesson, and we just present the 3 routes, and we have each child fill out a form about what they're thinking. So teachers can do an individual, if you will, assessment of children's skills. And then we put them in the groups in the second lesson where they try to solve this problem. And then a third day where they present their solutions, and the whole class figures out which ones they think are the best solutions. So there's an example of a lesson. It's one lesson, but it's a 3-day process.
So you mentioned too assessment. Are there built-in formative assessment tools and things like that that schools could use with the curriculum?
Right. We have a free assessment tool that assesses teacher assessment of children's social and emotional competence. And we also have measures for teachers to complete either after each lesson or after each unit on what they're thinking about, how it went, how the children reacted, basically their report of the effect of the unit. And then, of course, we have also have assessments for coaches, if there are coaches in school districts, which can provide feedback to the teachers on how they're doing. And
you have a coaching model, and you work to train coaches as well?
That's right. We have a coaching model to train coaches, and we have a manual for everything these days.
Yes, of course.
And we have, of course, a manual that helps the coaches. And then we do phone consultation with the coaches on a regular basis. Of course, usually in larger districts. Some smaller districts are now hiring SEL coordinators, as you know. And if that's the case, then we work with the SEL coordinator.
Very good. Other questions? All right, people are listening, but nobody's typing at this point.
Okay, so, well, maybe I can make a closing comment or two if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. Please do.
The goal of social emotional learning is not just to teach children skills in a curriculum in the classroom. It's to make our schools caring, healthy, compassionate places where everybody, all the adults and the children feel cared for, and respected and also challenged. And as you decide to pick a curriculum, the important thing is not just the curriculum itself or its evidence, but it's the ability of the organization to create a training context that will really help schools reach this goal. This is not easy. I wouldn't say that most schools in America are caring and compassionate places for children and adults. We have a big task here, and whatever curriculum you pick, make sure that the training organization understands the big picture of what this is really about, and choose wisely.
I think that's very good advice. And part of the impetus for this webinar series was that we get a lot of questions about curriculum. CASEL has a very fine tool, which we've shared and we can share again, that school teams can use to take themselves through a process to identify a best fit. And they really do focus a fair amount on the training pieces of that. What sort of training and support are you getting from the program? So I'm happy to send out that tool. And Mark, if people have some interest in speaking to somebody who's been doing the curriculum, I believe that you shared with us or can share with us some contacts.
Yes, we can. We have principals and teachers around the nation. We have model schools that can be visited in different cities. Chicago, for example, not too far from you. And unfortunately, for unknown reasons, the SEL worldwide website is down today. It'll be up again in a couple days. And feel free to contact me directly. Or go through the SEL Worldwide website and contact Dorothy Morelli. We're glad to connect you with other schools.
So you gave your email, was that on the first slide, Mark?
I believe it was.
Do you want to put that back just for a moment so people can get that?
Yeah. Sorry. Let's see. Oh, it's not on there actually. But if you just Google Mark Greenberg paths, you'll find me. And I'll go ahead and send Beth my email address.
Is that the one that I use?
Yeah, it's the one you use. If you could just post it.
The MXG?
MXG, right.
Yep, okay.
Great.
Yep. Let me get that and I will post it. And then any other questions that people have before we close the webinar here? Sorry, I was off momentarily getting the web email address. So here is Mark's email address. I've got the psu.edu. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So if you have questions directly, feel free to connect with Mark. You certainly can send me some questions as well. We will put this webinar up with a PowerPoint as soon as it is returned from our vendor doing the closed captioning. And we thank you all for joining this webinar today, and many of you have been joining many of these. And I really salute you for taking a very thoughtful and taking your time to identify a good program and one that fits. Everybody's familiar with the curriculum that's sitting on a shelf somewhere that doesn't get used because for whatever reason it doesn't work for the community. So please feel free to take advantage of these resources to help do that. Again, thank you very much, and we will send you all on your way. Please feel free to ask questions as they come up. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Bye-bye to everyone.
Bye.